Hello, coaches. I wanted to spend a little bit of time going over some of the basics of how I coach my esports team, both when we're in person and virtually. So that way you guys have some ideas, have some tips for how you can run your practice. And so one of the first things I encourage you to do, I feel that practicing 2 to 3 days a week is ideal, and practicing between 1 and 2 hours. So when we're in person, I generally go from an hour and a half to 2 hours. When we are practicing virtually, we'll go from about an hour to an hour and a half. But either way, right, things don't change that much. You'll see that I have practice plans for here for you that range from an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours, right? But what we're doing in that time is really always the same, and that goes whether we're virtually or in person. You'll see maybe one of the things that may be different if we're virtually is the fact that I start my in-person practices with what I call pre-practice. You guys know that school maybe ends at 1:50. You start practice at 2 o'clock, and there's that 10-minute window where kids are kind of coming in after going to their lockers, right? That's a great time to use to accomplish some things during practice. And so I'll call that pre-practice. And what I encourage my kids to do is have a healthy snack, and also set up their laptops or whatever device they're gaming on if we're in person. When we're virtually, I don't do so much pre-practice, but I do try to log in to my Zoom where I hold my virtual practices about 10 minutes early. Same thing. So kids who get there early, we can connect, we can build some relationships, stuff like that. But either way, practices should start with a pregame warm up. Even virtually, I still try to have my kids stretch. Shoulder stretches, finger stretches, warming up, maybe even a little jogging in place or other calisthenics. Because again, on top of the healthy snack, maybe in the pre-practice, this is a great way to start to introduce health and wellness to students. You can also talk about ergonomics and stuff like that earlier in the season when you're practicing how they should be sitting in their chairs, how far away, how to keep their feet elevated. And so at Garden State Esports, we have some resources that'll share along with this video that talks about just different types of stretching that we do. And what I always like to do is I eventually have my captains or some type of rotation of students who will lead that stretch. Because while you're stretching, that's a great time for you as the coach to start to discuss something, whether that's expectations or goals for the practice. If you do social emotional learning activities, right, that might be a good place to start. But always using time as a coach wisely. Even when I coach traditional sports, when my wrestlers and football players were stretching, right, I always made sure I talked about what we were going to be doing that day. So it's no different when we're coaching esports. After the pre-game warm-up, right, we go into our in-game warm-up, and usually that's a skills practice. So for Rocket League, they may be doing drills like goalkeeping, shooting, and passing and stuff like that. In Overwatch, they may go to the shooting range and just warm up their shooting, their flicking. Or they may jump into like a death match or a quick match. And really, it's just about warming up, getting your aim down a lot of times, and just feeling comfortable. Again, a lot of ways, like during a more traditional practice, you might warm up with drills and stuff like that before you move into the bulk of practice. And really, no, excuse me. And one thing I should stress, or you should try to do during an in-game warm-up, is try to find some way to collect data to show growth over time. So one thing I do at Rocket League is as kids are completing the practice challenges, they will tell me their score in goalkeeping and shooting and stuff like that. And I keep it on a spreadsheet. And I like to show the kids over time how they're getting better. So that's one goal that I have when it comes to in-game warm-ups is try to collect some type of data while they're warming up. So that way you have something to talk about and you can show growth over time. But what the bulk of a practice should be, whether it's an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours, is going to be a scrimmage. And during a scrimmage, right, you can either have your kids playing other kids within your program. You can arrange for a scrimmage against another school, right? Or you can even have kids go on ladder, right? So I have some kids that are high diamond, and they're that much better than everybody on my team. So I'll have them go on ladder, so they're getting equal competition, because having some of your kids crush some of your other kids doesn't really benefit anybody, right? So you want to try to match kids up that are about equal. But one thing that I'll do during a scrimmage is I will ask kids to save replays, and then we will look at the film and discuss what we see. And sometimes it depends on practice, but what I'll do is we may scrimmage, and then we'll all watch the film together afterward. Or I might have one group scrimmage while I take another group and we look at their film from the last practice or the last match. But again, as a coach, you have that flexibility to break up practice however you want. And so that's one thing that I always try to do is I do try to get some film review. And I'll talk about a little bit what it is that I'm talking about during film review. And then finally, after scrimmaging, if you have like a 90-minute or a 2-hour practice, it's always great to break up the scrimmaging, right? Teaching kids that they should take a break, readjust their eyes, readjust their body, move around a little bit. But what I love about giving breaks is that is another great time to address things that maybe don't have to do with the game, right? And I know for me, social emotional learning is really important. We talk about teamwork, leadership, communication. We talk about health and wellness, right? Diet, sleep, and exercise. We also talk about navigating digital culture and what it's like online and how kids can be prepared and empowered for situations that may make them uncomfortable online. But ideally, again, what I'm doing during break is I'm either discussing, right, that kind of stuff that we teachers love, right? We're kind of building up the whole student. So it may be esports related. So maybe it's about careers. It may be esports related socially or emotionally. Or sometimes I do spend directly talking to students about ways that we need to improve as a team, right? Or again, maybe I'm watching whole team film. But either way, right, building in breaks in between scrimmages for time to reflect, for time for learning about the esports ecosystem, I think is a really important part of being a coach. And so you can see in the 90-minute plan, I generally scrimmage for about 20 minutes. That'll get you about 3 Rocket League games. That'll get you maybe 1, maybe 2 if you're lucky, Overwatch games. And then I save my longer scrimmage, right, always after the break. Because I have just found in my experience that if you're going to have uneven scrimmages in time-wise, you want that longer scrimmage to be after the break, because you may address something during your break that will make that scrimmage time more meaningful. And then as always, right, we wrap it up and we pack up. So sometimes we'll do some cool down stretching. Again, I will bring up any topics, coaching points that I need to. This cool down stretch is also player led, again, so that allows me to go around, circulate, talk to who I need to talk to. We pack everything up. Usually we do like a breakout, you guys know I used to be, a traditional coach. So we'll, do all hands in, we'll break on the FH nights. So even if you don't have a traditional coaching background, right, you can still run a practice. And if you do have a traditional coaching background, one thing I'll point out is that your practice should follow a routine, right? It should be a ritual. We always start with these things, and then we always have a talk around this time, and we always kind of end the same way. What happens in between practice can kind of change, right? But you want to create that structure and routine so kids know what to expect, and they transition a lot faster when they know what's going to be coming up. And again, they learn that over time. But whether it's 90 minutes, whether it's an hour, whether it's 2 hours, you'll kind of see that it's always the same thing. We start with pre-practice, our pregame warm-up, in-game warm-up, we scrimmage, we take a break, we scrimmage again, we get some film in, we talk about, some esports related topics that are important to educating our whole student. And then we wrap it up, we pack it up, we break it out, and we get ready for our next practice. So let's talk about the role of the coach during practice, both virtually or in person. I kind of break this down into 2 separate areas. Number one, are the coaching points, right? How to actually improve at the game, because the difference between esports and a video game club, right, is the competition side of things. And so an esports team's goal, right, just like a traditional sport, should be to win. So from a coaching perspective, I focus on, right, really 4 things. The first one is communication. And what's important to know about communication when we're talking about an esport is we want to encourage our players to talk about what they are doing and what they're seeing, right? Video games are basically based on reaction. And when a player bosses around or tells other players what to do, they are taking away their ability to react. And often by the time they say, what they want that person to do, the moment has passed. And so one of the biggest things from a coaching perspective that I focus on when it comes to esports is communication. And to me, that means saying what you're doing and what you're seeing. Because if you are constantly talking about what you're doing, right, I can react. So if you're saying I'm going to goal or I'm going mid, right, I know what you're doing, so I can base my actions, right, on what I hear from you. And again, if we're all communicating, well, it gets really obvious, right, what we should be doing. The other side of that is what we're seeing, right? Especially games like Overwatch, communicating what you're seeing, right? If you see a diva in the back line going after your healers, communicating that could trigger the reaction that is needed to get that diva away from your healers, right? So when we talk about communication, that is the biggest thing I stress to my kids is you should be talking about what you're doing and what you're seeing and not just bossing people around. And then what happens over time is the team learns how to react to each other, right? Learns each other's tendencies. And so that is when, you hear people say, oh, the team is gelled or the team is coming together, they're learning how they play. They're learning how they play together. And the fact that sometimes there's a time to be a leader, but there's also a time to be a follower. And that role can change, minute to minute, if not second by second, right? And so that's kind of an important point that I spend a lot of time talking about is what communication means, what communication looks like. The other thing that I spend a ton of time talking about is positioning. Again, I always compare coaching an esports team to my years of coaching traditional sports, and positioning is always key, right? Whoever makes the less mistakes, whoever's in the right position on a football field, if you get all 11 people doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're probably going to win that football game. Esports is no different, right? Rocket League, people have positions. If it's an offensive, if you're on offense, if you're on defense, people should know where they should be. They should know what they should be doing, right? Same thing in Overwatch. The tank should be in the front. The support should be in the back, right? DPS should have a plan for where they're going to be positioned. And a lot of times that may be based on the map and stuff like that. But communication and positioning are really the bulk of what I'm focusing on a coach. Were we saying what we were doing and what we were seeing? And were we all in the right spot doing the right thing? And even if you are not a gamer, even if you are coaching an esports team like me, where you're not good at the game, right? I coach a Rocket League team. I'm not good at Rocket League. So some other things you could do is be familiar with the meta, right? And meta is a gaming term that means the best way to play the game. And you can find what the meta is and how it's changing on YouTube by watching Twitch streams, by reading patch notes and predicting the way the game is going to be played due to the changes, the nerfs or the buffs that the game developer makes. But the idea that you can still coach an esports team because you can learn about communication as the coach, you can learn about positioning as the coach, even if you're not good at the game, shouldn't deter you from being excited to coach your esports team. What you would want to do as a coach is you would want to familiarize yourself with the meta, learn the best way to play the game, watch the YouTube videos, watch the professional streamers, watch the professional events like Overwatch League, and you will start to get a sense of, right, what is the best way? What is the best positioning? Who are the best characters? What are the best tactics? And even if you're not good at the game, you can still learn those things. The other thing you might want to do as a coach, if you are not all that talented at the game, is think about skilled coaches. And this could be kids on your team who are good, and you could turn them into player coaches. Or something we do at the FH Knights, and we're working on with Garden State Esports, is reaching out to local colleges. Right, a lot of colleges now have esports team reaching out to their players and say, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody on your esports team to maybe come in remotely, once a week, once every 2 weeks, to work with my kids and show them something in game." So do know that you can also recruit talent if you're like me and not super talented at the game you're coaching, right? But when it comes to coaching, that's what I'm focusing on: communication, position. Knowing what the meta is and making sure my kids understand what the meta is, and then also making sure that I have skilled coaches who can come in and support my students. Other things that I'm doing besides coaching and helping my players improve in the game is what I call talking points. And again, the difference between professional esports and maybe amateur or scholastic esports, right? There should also be a focus on educating the whole student. And so, previously I mentioned how I use break time, time before practice, after practice, to address some of the things that I want to make sure my students leave my esports program having learned and having experienced, right? I call major talking points. And so one thing I spend a bulk of my time using is the Garden State Esports SEL curriculum that we've developed, that walks kids through, health and wellness and how that affects performance. We talk about diet, sleep, and exercise, which we call the performance triad, and how if you are not having, a balance between your sleep and your exercise and your diet, right, it's going to affect your performance. So we'll talk about stuff like that. We also talk about navigating digital culture, right? We talk about, life online and how to deal sometimes with trolls, how to deal sometimes with negative situations when you're online, but then also making sure you're not contributing, right, to those negative situations for somebody else. And that's because our mission at Garden State Esports, maybe above all else, is ensuring that we have safe and inclusive spaces for all students, right, to grow. And so I will spend time either being preemptive and addressing things like memes or different cultural things that kids may be experiencing, and I want them to understand that they maybe don't come from a positive place, or addressing concerns that I've seen on the team, right? The way my kids are talking to each other, the way that they're communicating, in game with against the other team and stuff like that. So it's really just making sure that my kids know, the right way to act online, the right way to act during competition, not too different than what we see with a typical digital citizenship curriculum, right? So I do spend a lot of time making sure that my classroom and my esports team is a safe, inclusive space for all students, but also students know what that looks like and they can help build those spaces wherever they wind up going as well. The last area that I'm spending a lot of time on when it comes to talking points and things not related to the game are with CTE activities and opportunities, right? One of the great things about esports is the ability to let students know that there are a lot of lucrative careers in the esports ecosystem. And even if they don't wind up becoming an esports professional player, right, there's still a lot of opportunities for them in the esports world. And I have found the best way to do that is to give them hands-on experience, right, in the esports ecosystem. So when we talk about career and technical education, right, the activities and opportunities that we want to provide as a coach is really anything that needs to get done, you want to have students do. And so when it comes to marketing events, planning events, doing, upkeep on your laptops, your devices from the, like an IT perspective or anything like that, troubleshooting, one of the things I love to do is I have a team statistician who, I mentioned earlier, we collect data over time. That statistician, collects that data, analyzes that data for me. We keep stats based on how we perform in the game. And the statistician will give the data to the casting team who will say, things like, so-and-so is shooting 75% for the season. So just like you would see in like football, for instance, with the casters using data, having kids fill those roles as on-air talent, as support people providing data and research, having kids learn how to analyze the meta, having kids go and look for replays of the other team. And so coming up with a game plan, analyzing replays, opportunities in finance and marketing when it comes to running your team, designing your jerseys, doing graphic design for social media posts that kids then post to promote, an upcoming event. Just kind of off the top of my head, there are so many jobs that we can incorporate into esports. And those shouldn't just be players on your team doing that, right? I always say that you should have a team behind the team. Maybe that's another way to get kids involved in your esports team. Maybe they don't want to play the game, but maybe they want to be the team podcaster. They want to be the team website builder. They want to be the team journalist. That's a way to get as many people involved on your team as possible. And so there are times during practice where I will grab those types of kids and I will give them something to work on. And overall, right, bringing those activities and opportunities are only going to strengthen your program, because not only are you addressing traditional skills like teamwork and leadership, you're also addressing health and wellness. You're also addressing, helping kids navigate digital culture and life online. But now you're also exposing them to careers. Your program, right, is more about, it's not about gaming. It's about growing students. And that's how you're going to make sure that your esports program sticks around in your district, right? So part of my time is growing the team and their talent and winning matches. But, I would say just as much of my effort is growing the other side of things, growing my kids as people, or a lot of my time is spent helping my kids realize, what path they're going to follow in life, right? So esports has so many opportunities that you as a coach, right, can take advantage of. And so this kind of stuff maybe isn't happening every day, but it's definitely happening often. And then the last point I'll make is really the difference between coaching in person and virtual. For me, the virtual tools that you would need to coach an esports team is something like Google Classroom. So you can post replays, you can post, even your practice plan. Students can comment, you can make announcements and stuff like that. So just like you would use Classroom to communicate with students in a traditional, class, I use Classroom to communicate with my esports team. I also really like Zoom, and I like Zoom better than Google Meet for a bunch of different reasons. Number one, I love to put kids in breakout rooms. And so what I'll do is we'll meet as a team in the main room, and then I'll break them out based on who they're playing with. So that way they only hear themselves when they communicate. And what I like about doing that as well is I could jump from breakout room to breakout room. And something I've started doing recently is I will record their communication in the breakout room, and then try to sync it up with the gameplay. So we'll take a replay for a match that we recorded. We'll take the communication from the Zoom that we recorded, and we'll kind of do both at the same time, so we can analyze what are we talking about when we're playing the game and the events, in the replay are happening. So that's been a added bonus of virtual, coaching an esports team virtually. That's not something I was doing when we were face to face. So that's another reason I really like Zoom. And then honestly, being able to mute students or put them in the waiting room, right? Sometimes kids lose their cool. Sometimes kids get frustrated. Just like I would ask them to leave the classroom to go get a drink of water, to go take a breath if they got upset during practice. I could put them in the waiting room. I can mute them. So that way they can, take a minute, collect themselves, if that type of situation arises. So Zoom to run the practices, Classroom to kind of do the prep work for the practices. And then, I kind of go back and forth on whether or not you need some form of asynchronous communication. I know a lot of the students want to be on Discord just because they think it's cool. And Discord does have the ability to have video and audio, so it could take the place of Zoom if we needed it to. But there's also some issues that come up with Zoom. And so for right now, I'm pitching it to my district, but for right now I'm using Google Chat, and that seems to be working just fine. So Discord, I would say, is optional, not mandatory, as much as the kids really like the idea. But for me, I would say Google Classroom and Zoom, right, are something you need to run your virtual practices. I have two monitors. On my monitor in front of me would be Rocket League, where I'm jumping between the games my students are in. And then on my other monitor would be the Zoom, where I'm jumping between the main room and the breakout room students are in. And then asynchronous communication has been helpful, but not mandatory. So if you can't use Discord in your district, or you think that you want to try without asynchronous communication, Google Classroom kind of fills that role as well. But that's kind of what practice looks like. Those are my coaching points. Those are the talking points that I'm working on. And hopefully that has been helpful.